Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the most recent installment of Building the Scottish State. And I have the great pleasure to have Miquel Strubell with me, longtime Catalan independence activist and very knowledgeable source for everything that's going on in the Catalan situation. Probably one of the, I don't think there's a higher authority than Miquel for what's happening from both a legal and political perspective. So first of all, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, but flattery will get you nowhere.
So the elections that took place Sunday, this was a good result. At least it was a pretty low participation rate. I think it was what, 53%, if I'm not mistaken.
53.5, down from 79.
Wow. Okay. But however, it was the first time that the independence parties got both a majority in the popular vote and a majority of the seats. So that's a good sign. So tell us a little bit about the results and what do you think it all means?
I think there have been basically three big changes. Firstly, the Independence Party representation has become more radical, if you like. The two parties that insist on a unilateral declaration because there's no way they believe that Spain will accept a negotiation for a referendum, for instance. They have gone up, they've increased their share within the independence representation, which has gone up from 70 to 74. That's well over half the seats, so that's very good. That's one big change.
Is that with the coup?
That's with the coup. Yeah, the coup went up from they're the radical, the most radical of the three. Yeah. They went up from 4 to 9.
Yeah.
So they're pleased with that. The second big result was a big increase in Socialist Party, who more or less recovered the levels of representation they had 10, 12, 14 years ago, that had been on a decline because they had become detached from the Catalanista definition, let's say, as the pro-autonomy parties became more and more pro-independence. They recovered, they did very well. In fact, they're the largest, the party with the most votes, and equal top party in seats, 33 each.
Okay, so the most votes compared to Esquerra, and then but they have one more seat. Wait,
no, Socialists have 33.
Slightly higher.
Esquerra has 33, and Junts have 32. Okay. So Socialists are happy, and the other big change on the increase is the Spanish nationalist ultra-right-wing party Vox, trained by Steve Bannon, and in the best tradition of European neo-fascism, they got 11 seats. They had no seats in the Catalan parliament. They got 11. Well, here am I talking about parties going up in seats, and the big loser was Ciudadanos. Ciudadanos, who belonged to the liberal group in the European Parliament, but were widely regarded in Catalonia by Catalans as a rightist party and very much an anti-Catalan party. Well, let's say their voters last time, they won the election in 2017, that illegally called election by the Spanish government. They won that one, but couldn't form a government. And this time they're down from, I think it was 36 to 6. I mean, they've been pretty well wiped out. And the reason for that is that they just weren't perceived as being the most viable opposition to the independence movement. So you have Ciudadanos splitting in their votes, going largely to socialists, perhaps back to the socialists, and partly to Vox, which creates let's say, exciting prospect for scenes in the plenary of the Catalan Parliament when it's formed early next month.
Okay. And why was the election called? I've kind of been tuned out of Catalan politics for a while once the COVID thing set in, and I had other things to deal with, but I'm back. Let's see. But because the last election was in 2017, and normally it's every 4 years, every 5 years, or
it's up to 4 years. So I'd say in principle it could have been called as late as December this year. However, in January of last year, the coalition more or less fell apart. The governing coalition more or less fell apart. They were not only squabbling in private, but also doing so in public. And the president, Quim Torra, before being barred from office for his banner on the outside of the Catalan government building, he announced publicly that there was nothing more to do other than to get the budget through Parliament, and then he'd call elections. Okay. So they got the budget in through Parliament, and then wham, the pandemic struck. Yeah. So he realized, and everyone agreed, there was absolutely no point, even if it were legally possible, in calling the election. So he carried on, and the government carried on, devoting most of its attention to dealing with the pandemic, having very few resources to be able to, let's say, compensate for all the self-employed people and many others who were losing a lot of money because of being closed down by the Spanish government and then the Catalan government. And he was then barred from office in, I think it was October, and did
they remove him from office, or just that he couldn't run again?
No, they removed him from office. It's yet another Catalan president who's ended up either debarred or in exile or shot by a firing squad or whatever. It's a long list, unfortunately, in the last 100 years. He was barred from office, so he just left, and the two governing parties said they agreed not to vote in a new president. Okay. Which meant that the timetable started rolling on to a fixed date on which the elections would have to be held.
Yeah. And does Quim Torra face any more legal stuff beyond that, or just he's out?
Yeah. I mean, he's expected before the court now for refusing to remove a banner which actually quotes the Human Rights Convention. I mean, it's absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. It just says freedom of speech, Article 16.
And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that was just before the election, the Spanish election. What is it, 2019, I believe.
It must have been, yeah.
Yeah, I was there. I was there at that time, and so he had the banner up there. I think it was free the political prisoners.
Yes.
But because it was because it was during the electoral campaign, they were saying, no, you have to take it down. It's electorally whatever. Then he took that down and he put up a thing, basically saying
freedom of speech
was being denied. And then I assume they ordered that taken down. And then did he ultimately, or did
he's awaiting trial for that second case now. Electoral boards can't go beyond their
purview, mandate. Yeah.
The rules that they have to be governed by. But I mean, anything goes to hammer the Catalan leadership, present or future. I mean, it's up. There's no question about this. The Junts leader, Borràs, has been charged by the Supreme Court for doing something I think the Supreme Court does itself, in managing its budget. And now she'll resign from being an MP in Madrid, so of course her case will have to go to the High Court in Catalonia. Will they let it go to the High Court? We'll see. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. And what is she specific? And because she's is it Laura Borras? Is that right?
It's Laura Borras. Yes.
And Laura. And so she's in the Spanish Parliament, and you know they wanted to get rid of her basically. So what did they do legally specifically to get rid of her?
Well, you know, we'll see what happens in the end. She was the head of the Institute of Catalan Letters. And a conversation of hers was tapped inadvertently. So, you know, in good legal practice, it can't be used in evidence against her, in which she advised one of her suppliers as to how to present the estimates or the bills for several different contracts. Mm-hmm. And they pounced on that. They got the Catalan police to investigate and write a report on that. Catalan police said, we didn't find anything. They asked the official auditors of the Catalan
they went shopping. Yeah.
They said, well, maybe there was, you know, it wasn't in accordance with strict instructions, but there's nothing legally reprehensible. Mm-hmm. So the judge then, well, they took it off to another judge, and the judge called for the Spanish Civil Guard to write a report. Oh, and that report was absolutely awful. Never seen anything like it. This lady has to be barred from office as an MP, but she was on the list of being perhaps their candidate for the Catalan elections, as she has been. So they doubly indicted her, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. And how do you see the formation of the government? I mean, we have, because I mean, just because from what I saw on the election night thing, because so Esquerra has, sorry, how many seats does Esquerra have?
Let's first say the outright majority will be 68.
Okay.
Esquerra has 33, and Junts have 32. Mm-hmm. So that's 65.
Right.
Then if you add the 9 from CUP, who are left wing, mm-hmm. then you get 74.
Okay. I also saw that they were talking about is it Podem en Comú? Is it the yeah? And I saw their aspiration to perhaps have them on. Tell us a little bit about Podem en Comú. I mean, I know they're linked to Podemos, but
yeah,
I mean, they have a mix of a few independents sprinkled in there somewhere, or how would you explain the party to how would you explain the party?
They're sitting on the fence as much as they can as regard the national issue. In other words, they're only concerned about social issues. Mm-hmm. You or I would say, well, look at the list of social laws that the Catalan Parliament adopted, sometimes by huge majorities, and which have then been thrashed up by the Spanish Constitutional Court. I mean, what more reason do you want for independence? They steered clear of independence. They voted no in the Catalan Parliament, showing their votes up so that everyone could see that they weren't the bad guys in 2017. And I think a lot of people haven't forgiven them for that. But they're basically, their claim to fame is the Barcelona City Council. You have Ada Colau is the mayoress, thanks to a motley crew, but including Ciudadanos, and led by the former French Prime Minister, who was found guilty by the European Court of Human Rights for trying to expel Romanians, Jews from France. So
we were happy to see him go.
I know you were. Yeah, I know you were, and we would happily send him back. His vote got Ada Colau into to retain the mayorship. She hadn't won. I think Esquerra had just beaten her. So you know, I mean, any kind of alliance is possible anywhere. Yeah. So Esquerra said, if we win, we will try and form a government with Junts, with CUP, so two independence party, and the Comuns, the Podemos, the Catalan Podemos party, who say they're sovereignists, but what sovereignist means to them is basically confederal. They would like a more decentralized Spanish state. They're not pro-independence. So I think the general
in Scotland, what they call Devo Max, basically.
Probably that, Devo Max. Exactly.
The rough equivalent, yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So Esquerra said that, but during the campaign, the Comuns insisted that they will never support a government with Junts in it. Well, Junts is actually a new party. So why they had such a visceral opposition to signing up an agreement with Junts is beyond my powers of comprehension. Yeah. In Junts, you have people. It's a transversal movement, basically. You have people who are clearly on the left, like Toni Comín, MEP right now, and former mayors of Cerdanyola, for instance. So I just don't think Comuns will finally enter that government, but at least Esquerra will have tried in accordance with its election pledge. Now, whether you can reach agreement with a party with 8 MEPs, they same number of MEPs, or you can reach an agreement with a party with 32. You know, which do you choose? You know, if you want any form of parliamentary stability, then obviously you'll go for the big ones.
Yeah.
And that would give a clear pro-independence coalition government and a clear independence message to the rest of the world. I mean, there were talks about the socialists getting involved in a government with Esquerra. You know, I mean, that is impossible. The Spanish deep throat, deep state, deep everything would come out in force, you know, to prevent that. And if the socialists did reach an agreement with Catalan pro-independence people, they would lose the next general election in Spain without question.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about the main figures. So the leaders of each party. So because it is very confusing. First of all, the Junts per Catalunya, right?
Junts per Catalunya.
But it's kind of
United for Catalonia, if you like.
Right. But it goes back, and you had, what is it, Convergencia, and then these other kind of iterations of the same, and it's kind of jarring observing it, because like, who are they? What are they? You know, talk a little bit about how how Convergencia et Unión evolved into Junts, or how does that work? If there's any there's any theory that you can put to it.
Okay, it's easy to explain. They didn't actually evolve into Junts. What they did was, in 2017, in a rather hurried way, was to support an electoral coalition called Junts per Catalunya as a coalition. And so during the last legislature, there was this coalition in Parliament. However, they split the ways. The former Convergencia had renamed itself the Democratic Party of Catalonia, PDeCAT, the initials, and they were standing at this election alongside this new party called Junts, which, let's say, the leaders Puigdemont, and there's no question that they are the Puigdemont side of the balance. But PDeCAT, the former Convergencia, did stand as well. And if they had got into Parliament, that would even given, you know, a couple of seats more to the independent side. They're more moderate independence party, let's say center right, depends on what
yeah, I know it's all very vague and confusing. But when you say center right, what does it mean to be center-right in the Catalan context. I think it's more like, I don't know, like our good friend Ramon Tremosa or others, sort of, more economically liberal to a certain extent. Is that a way of
I would say economically liberal. The PDeCAT, which is, as I say, is now out of parliament. They're keen on inheritance taxes, well, removing them, and on wealth taxes. They'd like to remove those. So let's say that their support comes from the middle class. I won't say upper middle class because they're probably anti-independence, but anyway, the solid middle class with its own assets, and fearful that if the left win, they will be paying more taxes.
And do you have, and what are the parties that would be considered, I guess, culturally conservative? I mean, obviously Vox, but among the Catalonian or the PP, but among the Catalan, I mean, can you consider either? I mean, Junts somewhat culturally conservative as well, or I mean, I don't know if that kind of fits or whether that's an apt description. But how do you see it? I mean, I could see elements of Vox being very religiously conservative, believing in the king, believing in the church and stuff like that, and I'm sure the PP as well. But are there other parties that have that kind of socially conservative aspect?
I don't think so. You have in economic terms, I think Catalonia has traditionally been left of center, which is not surprising. I mean, with a very large number of workers in industry, that's been declining fast, but services have taken over. So it has traditionally been left of center, particularly at election and general elections for Spain. Mm-hmm. And this was, let's say, it was hidden by Jordi Pujol's wonderful leadership. I mean, he was an inspiring person. So you have people you'd never expect on social class grounds to vote for Pujol in the 80s and 90s. He got that support as well. Mm. So that hid the apparent, the real left of center mainstream of Catalan politics. And right now, who wants to conserve this junk that we've got right now? I mean, everyone's calling for change. Everyone's promising to change things. Vox is promising to restore Catalonia to Spain and so on. So everyone's out to change things right, left, and center.
Yeah, okay.
Plus, this is an autonomy. They can't do any. The Catalan Parliament can't do anything about most tax, and 95% of taxes in Catalonia, can't do anything about pensions, for instance. Mm-hmm. So and it can't even decide how much to spend on health. I mean, that comes back from Madrid. It's part of the tax spoliation that does come back. Is absolutely fixed to the budget in terms of education or health. So let's say left and right in Catalan politics means very little when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of specific policies.
Okay, all right. And who is likely, assuming there is a government formed within the coming weeks, who would conceivably be because you have the president and the vice president, and you have the president of the parliament and the vice president of the parliament, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So so if it's the biggest party, would that be Per Aragonés as the president, and then
Per Aragonés as the candidate of Esquerra would obviously be. I mean, everyone thinks it's obvious that he will be the new president, and in terms of the parliament or the president or the speaker, it would be reasonable to suppose that it would be someone from Junts who got just one seat less. I mean, they're more or less similar in weight. Mm-hmm. There, personally, I don't think Laura Borràs would like that post, which is it doesn't have the executive power behind it, obviously. I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Josep Costa wasn't put forward. You've met Josep.
Yes, yes.
And I think he would fill the role very, very well.
Because he was vice president of the Catalan parliament before, right?
He was one of the vice presidents.
And is he Esquerra or Junts?
He's Junts. So that's why I say.
I thought he was Esquerra. Okay.
Junts would have the speakership, and the executive would be run by Esquerra.
Okay, and then would that mean that the vice president would also be Esquerra, and then I mean, maybe it's not codified in any meaningful sense, but I mean, is just based on the tradition from previous.
Yes, there doesn't have to be a vice president of the Catalan government, but it would be logical to imagine that the vice president would be Laura Borràs or someone proposed by her, and that would mean Esquerra as president, and as vice president Junts per Catalunya. And then there's the spokesman for the government. That's an important post that was retained by Junts per Catalunya in the last legislature, and I imagine Esquerra would like to keep it in this one. But if you look at the breakdown of the last government, all the key posts were in Esquerra's hands, actually. I mean, as if Junts had not really negotiated the payment for having the presidency. Education, vast budget, and health, vast budget. Both of them in the limelight during the pandemic, and of course the Ministry of the Economy, which was also in the hands of Esquerra. Now I think that was very unbalanced in the last government, and I imagine Junts would like to put that right this time.
Okay, and how do you see the negotiations going? I mean, the COOP party has not always made it easy, kind of thing, and so you would think that they would certainly ultimately vote to be in government, but often they've been kind of problematic in whether they abstain or whether they in what they and my kind of impression is I read that that maybe they might demand that there be a referendum, which is for me it's kind of easy for them to say if you require them to do that, given everything that's happened, and kind of more just like, well, you need to do this or we won't participate in the government, even though, well, they'd like to, but I mean, it's been problematic in the past. So how do you read the COOP and their role in it? And do you think that they'll ultimately not be too difficult in their demands for participation in the government?
COOP is very unpredictable because it works on the basis of assemblies. And I mean, one famous assembly was of 2,150 votes in favor and 2,151 against some particular option. And I think that's unfair to the voters. Let's say the COOP really ought to carry out, as far as it can, its own program, which is a commitment with its voters. Having said that, I hope that COOP has been growing up, has matured, has realized the consequences of its demands and of its own votes. It held up the budget for a whole year in a particularly critical time of the run up to the referendum, and that was so. And they have on other occasions also voted against, for instance, the third candidate to succeed President Puigdemont as president, who was Jordi Turull.
Yeah.
He was out on bail awaiting trial, and he went to the first vote to become president of Catalonia, and COOP didn't vote him in. And before the second vote took place, he'd been arrested. So, and locked up and tried and all the rest of it. I think had he been, had removed from power as a serving president, at that moment, things would have been, that would have stirred up a hornet's nest in a big way. So that, again, I think was a mistake on the part of the coup. I hope, but I don't have any grounds for, reassuring anyone that they will be more mature this time. They won't make unreasonable demands. They won't reach decisions which will harm the whole process towards independence, because in the end they can't do anything until independence arrives. I mean, it's playing around with breadcrumbs. I mean, it's almost a waste of time. So the fact that they don't see any future for negotiating with Spain, and Junts feels the same way on that issue, doesn't on other issues, let's say, that puts Esquerra, let's say, against the wall with a clear majority of the independence movement saying is, don't waste your time trying to negotiate. If they do say they reach an agreement, they'll trick you. They have never stuck to their word, and therefore let's not waste time, and let's move on in other ways.
Yeah,
time will tell.
Okay, and let's talk about the situation with the political prisoners. So now, of course, they were imprisoned, and then they were able to get the tercer grau, or they were able to get because of their good behavior, because of their exemplary character, all that, they were able to leave during the week and work and all that, and then they had to come back to work, come back to prison on the weekends. Is that how it works? Or?
It's not quite the other way around. They have to sleep at the prison 5 days a week, but they can go out to work on those 5 days, and they can go home for the weekend.
Okay.
But anyway, it's a kind of semi-status which forms part of the sentence. I mean, they are fulfilling their sentence, even though the public prosecutors are very much against this recent decision of judges in Catalonia. The judges who are responsible for penitentiary supervision of the prisons in which the men are in one, and the women in two separate prisons.
And are all of the prisoners able to do that?
It's the same for all of them.
Okay.
Although let's say the last time it was tried, the judges responsible for the women were more lenient in that when public prosecutors questioned their decision, the men's judge said, "Oh, well, go back to jail, and you don't have these rights right now." Whereas the women's didn't cancel this third degree probation period, or whatever you like.
And I imagine there are conditions, but I mean, of course, if they, go rob a bank or something, of course, they'll be put back in jail. But I mean, are they put under limitations of what they can do, or what they can politically express, or
well, let's say they were allowed to take part in the election campaign.
Okay. My
personal belief, and I'm not alone, is that the Spanish authorities hoped that Oriol Junqueras, the imprisoned leader of Esquerra, his presence would win them votes and would allow them to defeat Junts, who are, the devil reincarnated for Madrid and part of the rest of the world.
Yes.
So it was not 48 hours after the election night that the public prosecutor actually called on the judges to repeal this probation period. So, they wanted them out for the elections, and then they wanted them back in again. Yeah.
Okay. And let's briefly touch on the situation in the European Parliament, and then I'd like to go to some of the questions that have come up. So at this point, as we were speaking, as we were discussing before the show started, you have it's the 3 Catalan MEPs, Clara Ponsati, Toni Comà, and Puigdemont, and they were able to get immunity from prosecution. And was there a judgment on that?
No. I mean, every MEP automatically has immunity.
Yeah. Okay.
And that can only be waived by decision of the plenary of the European Parliament.
Okay, and so that's underway, or and maybe you could. I'll just give briefly that it's being considered in committee, and then that would go to the full House, and then. You predicted that it would likely pass, and that they would that it's very possible that they would waive the immunity of the 3 Catalan MEPs.
Let's say Spanish MEPs, other than the Basques and the Catalans, I think have been working day and night to convince members of their own parliamentary groups from other countries to vote in favor of the waiver. The waiver comes at a rather delicate moment because. Another exiled politician, Luis Puig, who was the Minister of Culture, who is also in exile in Belgium, his extradition request was turned down by the appeals court in Brussels on the grounds that the Supreme Court should never have tried him or any of the others for that matter, because they weren't MEPs when they were accused of rebellion and sedition and all the rest of it, which is obvious. I mean, under all European human rights conventions, international human rights conventions, every citizen has a right to the first instance judge.
Yeah.
And they were tried by a Supreme Court with no right to appeal.
Yeah.
Now, that is very recent.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to see this report that has been leaked to the Spanish press of the rapporteur of the jury committee to see what he says about that judgment. I mean, he's asking the Parliament to go against an existing judgment with regard to the same issue.
Okay. All right. Let's see. What are the main things Scotland can learn from Catalonia regarding gaining independence? I'll sort of start the ball rolling. And you can of course keep push it a little bit further. So in my view, the question of a legal referendum, and whereas you had in 2014 you had the the legal quote unquote legal referendum. That was agreed by Westminster, and that they both mutually agreed to accept the result. Catalonia has been petitioning for that for a very long time, let's just say the least, forever, and the Spanish government has steadfastly refused to even countenance that. And then there's the question of the Declaration of Sovereignty, and Scotland, under the going back to the Declaration of Arbroath, and then reaffirmed several times. Sovereignty has, the Scottish sovereignty has been affirmed, including just a couple of years ago when there was a motion in Westminster that went unopposed, asserting the claim of right for Scots to be independent. Whereas in Catalonia, you've had numerous bills to be attempted to be passed in the Catalan government that have been refused, and what was really the spark of the more recent Catalan government was the Statute of Autonomy, which was negotiated by, which was devised by this Catalan government, passed by the Catalan Parliament, passed by the Spanish Parliament, and in which they declared that the Catalans were a nation. And then as soon as it was passed, and then it was passed by referendum in Catalonia, and then the Partido Popular, as soon as it passed, they took it to the court saying we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this. And then there was the decision in 2010, and one of the most just ridiculously insulting decisions about where they can just go and pick apart the whole, what they don't like, and in the law, was that the Catalans are not a nation in any legally binding sense, and that was when it just exploded. That's how. So, in my view, the British government has been much more accommodating to accepting Scottish sovereignty, and that we're quibbling over whether or not maybe the rise in independent support will force encourage Boris Johnson to grant it, whereas the Spanish are just no way, no way, no way. So if you'd like to add to that, but also address the question of what Scotland can learn from the Catalan situation.
Well, there's no 4 Nations Cup or 5 Nations Cup in Spain. And this is partly because if you remove Galicia and you remove the Basque Country and you remove Catalonia or the Catalan lands, what do you call the rest of Spain, which is not a nationality? I would say Castilla, but there are some parts of Castile who say, no, we're extremeños or we're murcianos. So there's really no name for Spain without Catalonia. And I think that is, there was a radio or television conversation the other day by obviously a very, very nationalist man, saying is that if Catalonia were to go, Spain would cease to exist. I mean, it would disappear. It just wouldn't be. It's so absurd when you have Portugal all the way down the left-hand side and they survive that,
Yeah.
So it really is very, very hard to get through on a playing field which has, it's not level. I mean, you're trying to draw the match. You don't want to win because they'll be sovereign and you'll be sovereign. So it'll be a draw. But the other side doesn't want to draw it. It wants to wipe you out. And that makes negotiation almost impossible.
Yeah. I think another difference with the UK is that if Scotland does become independent and even Ireland reunited, maybe the UK will cease to exist, but England will certainly not cease to exist. So I think that's kind of that's a difference as well.
Exactly.
That leads me very nicely into the next question. Scotland is a country in its own on its own. Catalonia is a region of the Spain. What is your view of this? I'll begin again. I'll kick it off, and I think that Catalonia and Scotland are both nations in the sense that they're a people. And Catalonia, like other ethnic groups, like the Kurds, for example, have been stateless nations for a long time, and the Catalans stretch from at least from Valencia well into France, historically, and you still have many Catalan speakers in France as well, who have always been bound by a sense of being a nation, but they got like the Kurds, they got screwed by history and have never had a nation state in the kind of the Westphalian sense, with borders and all that. But that doesn't detract from the fact that they're a nation or a people, not in the sense of the borders. So within Spain, yes, it's a region in that has these borders of the region within it, but I think much more fundamentally, the Catalans have always been a people, even though the Spanish have done everything they can to deny that reality. Just for example, if I'm not mistaken, Valencian is pretty much identical to Catalan. I mean, it's the same language with maybe slightly different things, but the Spanish government insists on making sure that they're considered separate languages. So, because if they get together, then that makes them more numerous. Is that your reading of it, and would you like to add to that?
Yes, I largely agree. What I don't agree with is the term region. I invite the person putting the question to read the Spanish Constitution and the organic law governing the status of Catalonia, where both say that Catalonia is what they call a nationality. And the use of the word nationality is a way of discriminating between Catalonia, Basque Country, and Galicia, and the Andalusians actually managed to get on the bandwagon at the tail end, from regions which are more or less administrative units, like Extremadura. Extremadura has no history of being a people, and it's so obvious that Galicia, Basque country, and Catalonia are a people, and the constitution accepts that and acknowledges that, and the organic laws accept that. So why do they say nationality and not nation? Because another article says there's only one nation in Spain, and that's Spain. So the word nationality actually would come under the term that the Council of Europe used. They wrote a very good report some years ago saying just what nation means is different in different contexts and different cultures and different languages. So please just be generous and flexible about people defining themselves or describing themselves as a nation. So that's one issue. And then, yeah, Valencian is the Valencian word used for talking about Catalan. It's their variety of Catalan, like, you know, some Geordie in England or whatever. It has some features which are different from, let's say, Eastern Barcelona Catalan or from Majorcan, but I could say that the other way around, you know. Eastern Catalan has some features which are different from Valencian features or from Majorcan features. When a language has not been the language of a state for a long time, then it tends to fragment in the words used to refer to it. And that with Occitan is a prime example. It's Languedocien or Provençal or Gascon or whatever, which have gradually migrated away from each other because of the lack of a state to unify the language.
Yeah, and the French have been particularly effective at imposing their language, and, you know, maybe arguably more so than the Spanish, in the sense that, you know, it's the, you know, very much strictly the language of culture and administration. And they've, you know, I've talked to Bretons who used to get, you know, hit at school if they talked Breton, or, you know, that, and same with speaking Gaelic in Scotland or anything else, or any other languages in the country that proclaims that their official language. You know, it's not only just, you know, but really repressive measures. I'd like to kind of begin to wind things up in talking about kind of the parallels between Scotland and Catalonia, and especially now at this point in time. And as we've seen, Catalonia, you know, the pro-independence won the elections, you know, just a few days ago. There will be elections in May in Scotland, and it looks very likely that the SNP will win. You've got the list seats and you've got the constituency seats, and some people are talking about having more pro-independence parties other than the SNP at the list seat to try to, you know, reduce the number of, you know, conservatives and you know, Tories and, you know, Labour, etc. We don't know how that'll work out, but assuming they do, and so we don't know what the manifesto is in, and the group that you'll be participating in has some pretty good context to the right people, but it doesn't look, we're kind of counting on, at least from what, you know, the way it's presented, we're sort of counting on the, you know, this democratic increase in, you know, in support for independence translating into the UK government ultimately acceding to a Section 30 order in which they give us, you know, the power to legislate on non-devolved issues for certain things, in this case a referendum. So there is this kind of the prospect of the legal and of having a quote-unquote legal referendum, but it's very different in Catalonia. So although we kind of find ourselves on a very, you know, kind of similar state, in that, you know, we both, you know, both Scotland and Catalonia will potentially vote for a solidly pro-independence parliament. You know, but the road forward could be better. How do you see the parallels, and what, you know, the divergences and parallels there?
Well, ironically enough, and compared to 2014, of course, if the Scots and the Scottish Parliament do vote independence, and that is recognised, that will open the door to Scotland returning to the European Union that it should never have left. Whereas if Catalonia becomes independent, up to now, the discourse has been, the narrative has been that Catalonia would be kicked out or would proclaim itself to be outside the European Union and would have to get on the bottom of the list to join the Union once again. So that, as regards the European Union, the differences are considerable. Having said that, I think if whoever becomes independent first will, I hope, spur on the other nation to do the same. And I don't think you hear a lot of the sort of talk of domino theory, that this would lead to other stateless nations wanting to become independent. Well, why aren't they wanting to become independent now? You know, I mean, why would the independence of Scotland or Catalonia make the Bretons suddenly wake up? I mean, they have their own system.
Yeah.
But
more importantly for them, it would set the precedent. That's the thing. It's not a question of killing their desire to become independent. It's like, oh wait, they did it. Oh shit, you know, we got to start. You know, so it's more that I think in my view, it's more the legal precedent that they fear rather than, you know, the democratic desire.
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, you may be right. And then another big difference actually is the fact that Catalan elections are run on the basis simply of lists, just lists. So it's very proportional in representation in Parliament, which means that it is perfectly possible for several pro-independence parties to be in the Parliament. Whereas obviously first past the post is the reason why the SNP or the Welsh National Party, Plaid Cymru, are so prevalent within the independence movements in both nations. So I think I've been trying to get an electoral law passed, which would then mean that Catalonia doesn't rely on Spanish legislation to run its own electoral system.
Yeah, Scotland has the same issue.
And heck, you know, a number of nationalities or regions, to use the correct terms, have their own electoral laws. So it's obvious that some parties, enough parties, think that they would lose out to be able to actually block any initiative in that score. And other initiatives in 2006, particularly, I remember an initiative of a group of mine, and no way could that be done. Yeah. So those are two issues. And the other is just what is the role of the grassroots? This can't be left in the hands simply of the politicians. Yeah. Party politics is one thing. National sovereignty and independence must rely, in Catalonia particularly, I can't speak so much about Scotland, rely on pressure coming from grassroots, but not necessarily expressed the ballot box. In other words, pressure out in the streets. Yeah. This has been a dreadful handicap that we've suffered as a result of the pandemic, apart from 20,000 people dying from the illness. It has demobilized the public demonstration of support for independence.
Yeah. Okay. And as you saw in the letter that I sent recently about the group that we're forming, we got I wrote to the EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, asking them about and I got a good response, saying that under the treaty, that saying, so if Scotland became independent, could it join EFTA? And his response was pretty positive. I mean, he's just, but the main thing was that the country be recognized as having the legal competence to sign international treaties. And so that's what I saw as particularly key. And so maybe if the Spanish are saying, well, you'll be out of Europe, if you become independent, then, well, okay, all right, we'll join EFTA, but I'm just, I'm going to talk to I'm going to write back to the guy, and maybe he can talk at one of our Saturday evening meetings about what they would actually consider to be having the legal competence. Could it be through a unilateral declaration? That kind of thing, because it would being able to get into EFTA, and I think I remember a few years ago that one of the leaders of EFTA kind of got in contact with some people in Catalonia saying, think of us, kind of thing, looking at the situation. So I think that they would be sympathetic, and in the case of Scotland, certainly they would be. If they would recognize, it depends on how they would recognize the authority of Scotland to enter into negotiations. So we'll certainly pursue that, and hopefully it could be an option for Catalonia as well. And maybe the EU is not such a hot place to be right now, but provided you could at least continue to trade and that kind of thing. So do you?
But I mean, if you look at Kosovo, that Spain has refused to acknowledge, along with Russia and Serbia, and I don't remember what other Orthodox countries. The European Commission has signed a free trade agreement with Kosovo. So I mean, in terms of that, that was a commission. That's not the council. It's not the parliament. It's a commission initiative. I doubt there would be. I doubt the commission could reach an agreement with Catalonia as easily as it has with Kosovo, because there was little enough opposition, let's say, against it. Whereas in the case of Catalonia, I think Spain would really
it'd raise hell.
it would raise hell. Yeah. But I mean, EFTA has been on our list for a long time. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to bring this stuff together. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think it's a matter of having legal competence in the areas in which EFTA is active, which means free trade. So can Scotland control trade outside Scotland? Right now, I don't think it can. Certainly not with the rest of the UK.
Yeah.
But that would probably be one thing to explore.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We'll be wrapping it up here in a couple minutes. But just anything you'd like to say before we part ways?
Well, we've had several evenings of demonstrations and night of violence with quite a lot of fires lit and so on in Barcelona and Lleida, Valencia, in a number of the large cities. And
that was over the arrest of yet another rapper who insulted the king, and he was directly charged for, what is it, sympathizing with terrorism and insulting the monarchy, basically.
Yeah, I mean, insulting the monarchy you can't go to jail for, so he got a fine. But since he refused to pay the fine, he will have to go to jail in lieu of paying the fine on that score. But he was condemned for justifying and even inviting terrorism and naming particular terrorist groups to cut people's heads off and throw bombs about and whatever.
Okay, so it's a different case from Valtonic. I mean,
it's different. Although, let's say, in the back of it of the story is the freedom of speech. Are singers? Is there any limit to freedom of speech in lyrics that are sung on a stage or not? I'm not going to say yes or no, but that is the main issue. I think the European Court of Human Rights has come out fairly clearly in favor of artists. And my comment is, I don't think anyone would even have heard any song by Pablo Hasél had he not been charged by the court. So it's kind of Streisand effect here. He's become famous because he's been charged and indicted and found guilty in the courts. If they'd ignored him, I think he would probably have got bored and devoted his time to more profitable activities than singing very aggressive song. I mean, he's at the opposite end of my ideological.
I understand. Can you compare it a little bit to the Valtonic? The other rapper I think he's still in Belgium. I mean, were the lyrics clearly more?
I think Pablo Hasél is more outspoken, to put it that way.
Okay, all right, that's not in your understated fashion. Okay.
Well, but this guy, he's a communist. There's nothing wrong with being a communist, but he's also been sentenced to 6 months or 9 months in prison for attacking a journalist, and for 2 years in prison for attacking a witness. So I mean, he's not all that peaceful in action. Whatever he says in his songs.
Okay.
He's a tricky guy.
It's a different case.
So long as you stick to the principle of freedom of expression, then okay. But in personal terms, as I say, we're worlds apart.
And were his lyrics in Catalan or Spanish?
No, in Spanish. He's not pro-independence. I mean, he's a communist. He wants to get rid of the king so that Spain has a republic. He's not.
Okay, so he's not tied up with the independence movement in any.
I don't think so.
Was Valtonic somewhat, because he was from the Canary Islands, right? I mean, is there?
He is from an island, but he's from a Catalan-speaking island, which is Majorca in the Mediterranean.
Sorry, not the Canaries, right? Yeah.
Okay.
The Balearic Islands. Right.
Balearic Islands as a whole, and specifically Majorca. Let's say he's in very good terms with the exiles in Belgium, which is where he is. I'm not sure how much he's in favor of independence as such, because it's not his part of the Catalan lands.
Sure.
But he's not outspoken anyway.
Okay. On that note, we'll leave it. But thank you so much, Miquel, for being with us again, and I'll see you Friday.
Good.
Saturday.
See you on Saturday, and thanks to the people who put questions into the program.